question for you. The first one to start off with is, where did the idea of the film originate from? I know that you had mentioned where the title originated out of in our intro, but can you speak a bit about where you came up with the idea of making the film? Yeah, making a film but nothing, starting from nothing.
I mean, it was like an ontological project because the cut signifies nothing, it shows nothing. But so much of thinking of cinema assumes there's something, so we have the frame. So I want to think it in relation to nothing. And I thought it would be nice to relate it to the real daily lives of my friends and I, right? Because philosophy began with Plato showing up to court for Socrates, you know? So I'm very serious about philosophy. I don't think it's some cheap academic game of footnotes. So I think it's about showing up. I want to show up to my friends at the level of thinking that it requires. And I was already inventing a language at the time, because I've been making movies when I was like 11 or 13. And also, you know, it's a part of the standards and history of cinema that you got to do it before Orson Welles, right? So that was another reason I thought I should do it. And then, yeah, but I was looking at old footage I had when I was 17, and one of them was the actual eights on my oven, right? And it's such a striking image. I'm like, hey, I gotta do something with that. So I came back to that, but also I just rethinking my ontological project and thinking of the cut and its relation to infinity and how to organize our lives. Because one thing I like about Badiou, more than this whole system, is just his schema. I like the idea that philosophy is just love, politics, science, and art.
And this is Alain Badiou.
Yeah.
Being an event.
Yeah, like so this what I like about it is that it's very classical because philosophy, you know, love of wisdom, but also politics is the good, science is the true, and art's the beautiful, it's the classical, good, beautiful, and true. But so philosophy acts like a camera. Philosophy doesn't invent truths, it just captures it as it happens. So when something happens, philosophy invents a new concept of nothing and then organizes a whole system that way. But I thought I have an actual camera, you know, so I could actually do that and organize my reality according to love, science, politics, and art, and cut it infinitely, so I could get a true picture of what I'm actually living. Because I really do believe in cinema. I don't think it's just another game like that. I think it's a new space in the history of human thinking, and I take that very seriously. Like, one of the great picture makers is Eisenstein, and he made like October, right? And he's trying to do like a propertyless vision of seeing, while a society at that time was trying to think of propertyless vision of society. And I think that's really important to me. I want to think that because, so yeah, for example, Godard committed suicide like a couple years ago, right? And like, so much of philosophy is caught in sort of Kant-Hegel dialectic, but I'm convinced philosophy could be done without language. I think it could be done with cinema. And I'd rather accept this Kant-Hegel dialectic and think it with like an Eisensteino Godardian question. And if Kant-Hegel movement repeats, we have to rethink what it means to be Marx in that relationship. Yeah, so I figured it really seriously. Now I'm interested in math, because cinema doesn't need language to think, just like painting, just like music, just like mathematics. So you could think rationally without language and some mysticism. And that's really important to me.
There's a lot to unpack there, but maybe I want to ask, this film seems like a very collaborative process with your friends who are in it. Do they also, did you guys also agree to kind of this idea of what cinema would be before you made the film, or was this something that you guys kind of arrived to in the process of making it?
Oh no, we're all fellow ontologists with me and my friends, in fact. No, I'm dead serious. I just mean in the sense that one of the critiques of the film I hate is like, oh, how you have all this philosophy in your movie, they're all poor. How would they ever understand it? Are you kidding me? You know how easy this stuff is? And I think it's so important, this idea that like you have to always lower the standards of human thinking just because of your economic background. So all these weird attacks, like, oh, why are they reading these books, blah, blah. Like, no, what's hard is like poverty. Philosophy is easy, right? So I think it's really important that, no, we all talk about the cut, actually. You know, we all talk about infinity. That's why my friend says, oh, I lost faith in infinity. It's like a real thing. It's not fake. Like, Yeah, because it's not in the footnotes. I actually really try to live our philosophy. I'm not handing in the paper.
Right. And that's like another question that I had. I mean, we could think about, this lost faith in infinity happening. So, trying to like process this as I'm going along. But so not only do your friends talk about the suspension of like humanity and reason, their state of poverty, but also there's like frequent cuts in the film that suspends images and sound. So how did you, I guess, arrive at this particular style and technique?
Like I said, like my pops got me a camera when I was like 13, so I was making movies when I was 13 with my friends who are in it actually. So that's why some of the footage looks like we're like 14 because that's probably how old we were. And I just went back to my old footage and I'm like, okay, this image is interesting. I don't, stuff like that. So, like anything else, it's about becoming fluent with the medium. So I just been experimenting for quite a bit of time since I was 13. So by the time I'm like 24, it's totally right. And
How
so,
many hours of footage is that?
oh, no, actually, no. People think I've been filming this for years. This one, it took like a year and a half. It's in fact, it's just this idea that like, if you're gonna subtract cinema from stuff that it's not, right, or some stuff like you always try to add, like a commercial viability or like, I don't know, a screenplay or something. But if you just focus on what cinema is, then you start playing with the cuts, you start playing with these type of things, right? So I've been experimenting for quite a bit of time, and like experimenting with like de-linking the sound from the image, from the voice and the sync sound. I want to experiment with that because so much of the history of cinema, every time there's a new break, it's when we dissociate the sound from the image. And we return to something in relation to silence. Like we look at Wells and Hitchcock, it's like you're doing silence still, right? When the neorealists, or when when with the Italians, the voice is not connected to the mouth, right? When you see Attack of the Clones and you use ADR for the CGI, it's too loud, so they did that. So I just think every time there's something new in the history of cinema, you have to rethink the image sound relationship. It's often disconnected. But also I just want to re-experience what thought feels like in the back and work with stuff with the voiceover and that sort of connection. I just think we take it for granted that like this voice comes out of our mouth. I think that's a weird abstraction to take it too seriously. And so the styles came from working on it, and then this interaction with philosophy, just because I think philosophy and cinema have similar origins in the sense that no one thought of cinema as an art immediately, and so it couldn't have to become that. But I take that seriously in the fact, okay, I want to take something from art, something from science, something from politics, and from love, and put it around this cup. Right? So it was just sort of thinking that relationship to it. Like, I think it also came from the fact that, like, when I was 11, I read Dante's Comedy, and I was really touched by the syllable count stuff that he plays with in Terza Viva. So this relationship between number and language is always interesting to me. I thought I wanted to be a poet, but then like I realized I wanted to make movies, so I started describing things I wanted to see. So yeah, this relationship between number and or multiplicity and the word, and then subtract the word to get to something else, is where that type of style would come from. And obviously, studying the history of cinema, I mean, it's only 125 years. A teenager could like study that and before they leave their teens, figure something out. I promise you. So it's important to be confident in relation to the history of thinking. I know it might sound crazy what I'm saying, but like we can't let colonialism win and think we can't think. I refuse to act like I can't think. So that's why I think 125 years, not that bad. Learn some set theory on your free time. It's not that bad. Human thinking is infinite. We can't keep letting ourselves live in finitude.
I guess then I want to come to this next question about the cut, like the decision of where you cut. I don't imagine that it's random. I think that there must be some kind of logic or mathematics. Can you explain? Or talk about it?
You know how Eisenstein has his theoretical books and everything? And he freely admits he writes a theory after trying to make a movie. He's just kind of like gawking at his own pictures. Oh, it's not so great. Look how these cuts work. It's kind of like that, to be honest. Because like, obviously I ingest as much math and philosophy and politics and love as I can. But I'm not like looking at a little workbook by my computer and maybe I could do this. It's fact, like I just subsume it and I look at the thing and then I just follow my pure gut intuition. And even then, the fact I'm calling it intuition, I just don't think it's necessarily mystical. So it might feel like that. It's just this idea that like you'll know what's beautiful. You just have to trust your gut instinct. Like that's the whole idea of taste, right? It's to protect yourself, to not get into like weird discursive ideas and not trust your gut. So much of taste is how we survive too. So you have to be able to think on your feet to be victorious. So part of it is also like ingest all the stuff and this sort of stuff. And I'm all obviously it's really simple. I look at when I don't like that image, I cut that part out, and just whatever. When I just like everything I see, you know,
Yeah.
it should be that simple. Like when you're painting, you're not like, oh, but is it look like a woman or a beach or no? I think it looks good, and you walk away.
Well, I did want to come back to the idea of beauty because I found some of the images so beautiful, particularly when you layer them on top of each other. Like there was that scene where those kids are like playing with the iPhone, and then there's that image of you and your friends who are younger in the background, and there's a grid, that pattern right behind them. And so I was wondering about, when do you decide to let images and sounds kind of lead together? I guess it must be similar in what you find beautiful, but how does that?
Well, it's very simple. It's just like it's the way mathematics or anything else works. It's like when shapes are similar, you should just put them side by side. When colors are similar, you work by contingency. Once you work by necessity, you're gonna become an academic and be boring. You have to like work by contingency, and oh, this is red, this is red. Maybe there's something there, you know. You see if there's something to see at all, or like, and that's where great mathematical, philosophical insights happen. You just kind of make a gamble that these two things are the same. That I don't know. Let me think. Like. Meno's slave and the thinking being are the same. You know, and usually in the time for Plato, it's not the same. So you just take two things that seem like they're not the same and just gamble, okay, maybe they're the same, you give it a shot. And I think that's how thinking works. Actually, philosophy starts with thinking and being are the same. No one thought that apparently. You know? So this idea that like you could take two things and they might not be the same. Or the fact that I'm like, assuming the cut and sight are the same. Even, you know, you just have to find these two things, or three or four, or infinite, and find some sort of cut to bring and take apart the same thing at the same movement. But I think it's that simple. I think that's why when you see, I know that movie like Mr. Picasso, we're just painting and it becomes this thing and that thing and the thing and that thing. Because suddenly the beach looks like the woman's leg and it's blue, so it goes that way. And just kind of follow that question, and there will retroactively be a logic towards it. You know.
Are you the only one that edits the films, or do you work with?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I would never allow that.
One of the things that also struck me about this film is how much, to me, like hip hop seems to play a big part of the film. You know, you're dropping beats, you're dropping verses, you're chopping some screwing sounds and images.
Oh, relation to hip hop?
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, like when you talk about the importance of poetry too, the importance of poetry for thinking, and like, it's like the poetry of our time still, and I think that's really important. I like to use this example, but I feel like, I remember I was critiqued a lot for quoting Nas or Jay-Z or whoever. I don't know, but you and Godard could quote Rimbaud till the end of time. I can't quote Nas. And Nas actually continued being a poet. He didn't become a slaver or a weapons trader. And I think that's really important. He's making songs that are still good today, and that's incredible. And I just feel like these things are really interesting to me. And in terms of sampling and using music and just sampling these ideas of reality, is because philosophy is also taking a sample of Robespierre, taking a sample of Mao, taking a sample of Picasso and remixing it and rethinking it. So there's that relation too. And obviously there's cuts in the, the music of hip hop music, so that's really important. But also, obviously, it's an art form that people who are poor can take part of and feel absolute dignity while taking part in it. Because you can make a song with nothing, you can make a film with nothing, and it's really important that you can make these things with nothing. Because Socrates said, all I know is I know nothing, and this is very specific nothing he was talking about. It wasn't this cheap modesty people think it is.
I have one last question before I throw it to the audience. We're screening the film 10 years later, after a very successful festival run since it premiered at Locarno. Can you speak about the film's critical reception and how it's, you know, as you look back on it and how it's
Critical reception? Never look at the critical reception. No, I mean, obviously, if it's your first feature, it's very tempting. But for what? Now that I'm older, now that I'm an old man, it's like you should never look. You should keep going straight into your ideas. Because if they're going to have some collaborative thing to you, they'll actually maybe actually come up to you and talk to you about it, something very serious. If it's just some other situation on Loserbox, I have nothing to do with that. Yeah, so I just think it's important to like work with who you actually work with. There's obviously critics I read because I respect them as writers and thinkers. But I'm not just going to read anything, you know. There are limits to democratic thought.
On that note, I'm going to throw it to the audience. Does anyone have a question? Please raise your hand. In the middle, in the red.
Hi there. I was really interested in sort of your concept of art, politics, science, and love, and I guess in the making of this film, you talk about things looking like the same, but were there moments where things felt like they were conflicting between those ideals, or how those four ideals sort of connected?
Like how those work now? Like if I can tell the difference between like love and politics and science and art?
Yeah.
Like how can you tell the difference?
Or if you could, yeah.
How you can tell the difference is because so in politics you're in an infinite situation, okay? And then there's this larger infinity, apparently larger, called the state. And then you try to build, there's like a two there, right? And then you try to invent something to circumscribe that measure, like a one, like the one of equality, okay? So politics goes from a second infinite, a first infinite, a two, and then a one, okay? Love is the opposite. It starts with one, then two, because you meet someone, and you invent infinite infinities. So you actually can tell the difference. And then with science and art, yeah, so science, you've formalized reality at the level of the letter, right, with mathematics. I don't know if I trust these other sciences without mathematics. And then with art, yeah, you're creating forms in a free creative way that's not necessarily reducible to letters, right? Yeah, that's how I tell the difference. And then, that's what I try to think about when I'm looking at the world. But obviously, it usually comes in a mixture. But it's also good to know which is which. You know, you never want to be like I think it's dangerous to confuse your art for politics too, for example, is a common mistake. Not to say you can't think it there. I'm just saying it's good to delimit which is which so it could be full in each spot. You might think you're in love, but you're in a crazy political situation. I don't know, I just feel like you should know what's going on in your life, or else it's really scary. Yeah, so that's how, and that's what philosophy is about, that's what cinema is about, I think. I mean, how many people like learn how to fall in love by watching like Notting Hill or something? You know, I think it's very important that we look at image and sounds and think about how it relates to our lives. And like, I mean, that's why I like gangster pictures. Like, how many gangster pictures taught me how to live? You know, these sort of things. So I just think, just like philosophy, it's supposed to inspire you, and like directly what love is, what politics is, what science is, and what art is. Like, I think, yeah, you should learn from movies. Like, people get so excited when Hegel talks about the French Revolution. But Eisenstein in October, you should take a second look at that one, because he actually shot it, and it's way better. And I think that's how, and I think you're allowed to learn politics from October. And I think in the future, we're going to continue watching October. It may not be number one in sight and sound, because it's October, but it should take a second look.
I have a question right here.
Yeah, I have two questions. One is, at the end of the finished product, what is the process of getting it to the, is it festival, scientific? And my second, I didn't understand why the word nigger was used. What were you thinking of? What was the message there? Could you fairly clear language?
For sure.
Explain?
The first question was, I got a message on Tumblr from Locarno if I should give them my film. And for TIFF, I just sent a DVD. And for the second question, because my friend is black and he was using that language and I refused to censor him when he's expressing himself. And he's one of my best friends, so I just didn't want to edit his language.
But that was the medium because he's black and underneath it, or did you have a more fundamental?
Oh no, I just mean that because I don't want to take away any right of how he might want to express himself, just how no one else gets censored of how they speak. When my friend was speaking on recording it, I asked him, "Do you want you want to use this one? Do you want to use this one?" We talk about it, and he's into it, and he likes the film. So I just didn't want to say like, "Oh, we're gonna remove this, remove that," just because I think it would be dishonest about what our daily life looks or sounds like.
I think we have time for one more question.
Thank you for the film. Challenging and confused I am. Just as a small observation, when I look at the screen that's behind you, and I gotta look past me to see it, I like the way the 88:88 is. It's not the way it would be on, it's more rounded, where maybe on some displays, depending, it might be square, just a certain aesthetic. And I'm thinking of the 50, how it becomes that cursive style and it interacts and comes in. I think in some ways emulates a little bit about your film in some ways. And I think that image might even be from your film. I thought that was like snow or seeds floating around, but it was birds flying. My eyesight's not very good. So I really enjoyed what is it that I'm looking at, and I had to calibrate, at least amongst the number of images, and the bird scene I delighted in, because they're flapping. They're probably gulls, but that wasn't my first impression. What is? So I like the journey that you had, as much as it was tough to understand, but I enjoyed the agitation, so thank you.
Oh, thanks for the comment. Yeah, but exactly, like philosophy is always like, what is? What is that? And I feel like it was actually both still sometimes and birds. You know, as that thing I'm talking about, like they're two different things. And that's how you bring it together. But I appreciate your comment.
Is there time for one quick question if anyone has one?
The question is just about, I mean, you already referenced some filmmakers, so maybe specifically filmmakers that influence,
Yeah, sorry, I think that
some filmmakers that have influenced you or that we see kind of touches of in this film. Can you mention them and how they may have influenced you in this specific film or in general?
Or like which filmmakers in general influence me?
Yes.
Um,
And how?
And how.
Directly, yeah.
I mean, there's so many actually. I mean, I'm always thinking of Eisenstein, just because he's like an inventor, and I'm always thinking of Godard. But I think with this, I try to think of everyone I've ever thought about. There's like a little bit of Frampton in there. Actually, I was touched by that thing about Pere Portobello because I was looking at his vampire movie when I was looking at the high contrast, black and white stuff in his picture, and I was thinking about there's my high contrast stuff here, so I was touching. But yeah, those two are the main ones I'm like always thinking of, but just because when I think of the history of cutting or the history of montage, there's not that many I think who are really thinking about it. Like obviously I'm against Griffith, and that's why I started with Eisenstein, and against a certain type of Hollywood pictures, I started with Godard, so it's sort of antagonism. But I think what I think with them is that there is a form of thinking that's not necessarily linguistic. And I think that's a really powerful idea, and that's why I think with them so often. Because what is it today? It's like people want to make AI prompt art, and then you start with language, right? When Truffaut is against the tradition of quality, he's against starting with the screenplay. Like every time something pops up and you throw words first, we always end up in trouble. So I think that's really interesting to think with the filmmakers who doesn't go to language right away. And I think it's also because language is one of the first weapons that's used to colonize us, right? But I think there's something very powerful in cinema that I can see and think without having to reference language and be a free human being by doing so. So those two particularly touch me.
Well, thank you so much, Isaiah.